I just want to know from your experience, what do you see out there in terms of people having ready access to timely information to be able to implement the sorts of tools and techniques you discussed in part one?
Yeah, it's interesting because like last week we were talking about why we need to do this and some of the what's in terms of measures and how to think about the business. And you pretty quickly go to the how do you actually make this information available to support what you've decided is your important measures and how you're going to grow the business and make the business higher value. And I think my experience in that question of how is varied and changing all the time. It's most likely that organisations have some capability in the data area, but more often than not, it's quite fragmented. And what we see is organisations having pockets of assembly of data, and then that assembly isn't in a coordinated way, and there's not really a common view of what the data meanings are and a common view of where the data is stored and accessed. And unfortunately, if you do the metrics on that, you find that there's can be sometimes up to 70% of the time is spent on assembling data by people that really are not the people that should be providing the data. They're really the people that should be analysing the data. So one of the exercises we do is a bit of a survey of time spent during a period as to time spent assembling. And what I mean by that is putting things out of spreadsheets into databases, or every month transferring something to something and getting a pool of data ready to then analyse. That's the assembly piece. And then how much time is spent actually analysing or supporting the measures and so forth that we talked about last week. And it does surprise me at times to see just how much time is spent manually assembling data in a world where there is so much technology capability, so much capacity for having data managed and understood. I think there's a real opportunity for businesses that have got their requirements right to actually really turbocharge the environment to provide the information in a very automated way and give those analysts more time to be looking at the insights and information that's being provided.
I've been in this industry for 20 years, so it's amazing to still see that with the advances in technology, that we don't have that data readily assembled and able to be used when it needs to be used. But I think, Neil, my experience when we do data and analytics strategies is there's some significant dimensions other than the technology that need to be considered. And I know you'll understand this as well. We do a data strategy, a data and analytics strategy, and we always start with the business requirements. But there's other aspects to it that need to be looked at as well. Our strategic planning process for a data and analytics initiative is relatively straightforward, which is in keeping with the theme from last week as well. But the nuance comes in terms of the what I call the social science experiment. It's the people change, or people getting ready for the pending change that's about to come in terms of being data driven. And data driven is far more than a technology or process piece. It's much more of a mindset piece, and it's considering data proactively in a business sense rather than reactively.
So, Michael, have you seen instances of the platform, someone behind the walls building this platform almost in the build it and they will come model versus it really having a clear purpose as to what do we need this information for?
I have, Neil, and that surprises me as well. We typically do it the exact opposite way, as I've said, and we'll go into more detail about specific business use cases and then working from there. And I like to call that front to back. And so front is the actual consumption, and then there's the consumer, the user, and then back through the process ultimately to the data. So we'll decide what they are and agree what they are up front, and then start to build them out incrementally so they all become sort of self-funding is the ideal. But I think I'm still seeing, and it sort of amazes me that there are organisations and large organisations at that are still building the exact opposite way. So a data platform becomes a receptacle to gather every single bit of data they can find in the organisation, and sometimes outside of the organisation, and load it into the platform. What that does is create a lot of cost and take a lot of time to get to a position where there's still no business benefit from that particular platform, and it has very little, if any, usage.
It's interesting because of the work CharterX does in more of the enterprise architecture space. A very important component of that is the information architecture, and when we work together, and we make sure that how you're thinking about that information architecture and how it needs to sit alongside the other transaction applications and the other security models and the infrastructure play, that's all marrying in and represented as it should be. My experience is also that when there's demand for, I need this information now because I've worked out what's important, the transaction systems often get hit. So let's build that reporting out of the general ledger system or the customer relationship management system or the product system or the supply system, rather than thinking about it as an information system. And as I said earlier, that most organizations now have an information or data sort of environment, but how it sits in architecturally so that there isn't that trend to trying to capture history in transaction systems or trying to merge other data from other systems from one transaction system to another, or trying to include external data into that system where it's not really the purpose of that system. And you'll find these transaction systems get overloaded with an information emphasis versus their role in life is to be very much the transaction engine that's feeding data into the information repositories that you describe. So that sounds like very logical and sensible, but if you don't take a strategic architectural approach and you position the information architecture inside that, you do see those things happening where across down the hallway someone's building out in their assembly exercise part of the ledger or part of the customer system. They're building out really an information system. Then the next part of the corridor, someone's building the data warehouse or more contemporary approaches to data capture, and there's two spots where it exists, and we all know that happens. But the architecture and the link to strategy is a way of really making sure that we don't see that proliferating through the organisation.
Yeah, Neil, I totally agree with that. So there's a couple of lenses you can look through, and we do work together with your organisation, CharterX, to make sure any architecture frame that we put up for a data platform fits within the broader enterprise architecture of the business. But I think that comes back to, again, getting senior people across the enterprise locked in to the fact that information and access to information for insights, and there's various consumption methods, is a different exercise than transaction processing, and architecturally that has to be set up that way. But by starting with business use cases, and I don't mean detailed use cases that you would have if you're implementing, a project for the next 6 months. I mean at the level where everyone understands that, and I'll give you an example. Say if you're a utility, this is the level that we capture them at the start of the strategy, and we get all the executive team to agree to the set that we've come up with. The utility has a very significant cost item for maintenance, being a highly capital intensive business. So I'll give you an example in a utility, for example, and we've done this one before. So the utility has maintenance as a significant cost item, and if they can get some reduction in maintenance cost of their assets, then that has a significant bottom line effect. So start with that one because it's got bang for buck. So we would say if you can collect data, and I'll give examples of that data shortly, that would enable you to do some predictive analysis that you can optimize scheduled maintenance for your assets. That would save you X% in your maintenance cost line. And to do that, you would have to collect data from your asset management system, where your maintenance schedule and your past maintenance is kept. You'd collect some GIS data in terms of location of that asset, and that might have some external factors like weather data as well included, which can impact the wear and tear on the asset. And then you'd collect also telemetry data, some SCADA data, because those assets have many sensors on them and they're collecting temperature and volume and those sorts of things. So if we could combine those sets of data to give you a set of data you could run a model on top of to be able to predict maintenance, that would save you some money. That has a set of users, it has a business benefit, and it contributes to a strategic objective of the organisation.